ニコンは光を使って世界を変えていきたいと。光で世界を満たしていく。光で応えていく。
本当に細部にわたってこだわって何一つ妥協したところがない技術を追求した技術者の知恵の塊とも言うべき商品と思います。
道具としてやっぱり使い勝手が良くないとカメラとしては失格だと思っています。そこに対してのこだわりというものは DNA として持っているものだと思っています。
Hi everybody, welcome and thank you so very much for tuning in to learn about winter photography. My name is Laurenson, and in this presentation I will discuss with you gear and composition. So we will have an overview of the essential gear that you need to do winter photography, as well as protecting your camera in case of worst case scenarios. And I will also be sharing with you in-depth compositional tips and ideas and camera settings to make sure that you get beautiful winter photos. So first of all, a little bit about me. I'm a landscape photographer based out of Alberta. My handle on Instagram is @motherpixels. I have been doing landscape photography since 2016, since I have the Canadian Rockies just about an hour and a half away from where I live. And in my past 4 or 5 years, I've had the incredible opportunity to work with some great brands, including Nikon, which of course is my camera brand of choice. I've also worked with other tourism boards like Destination Canada, Travel Alberta, the City of Calgary, so on and so forth. So I'm going to dive right in and talk to you a little bit about essential winter gear. So these are things that will make your life a lot easier and protect your camera to make sure that there's no long-term damage to your camera. So first of all, what are the basic things that you need to do winter photography? Well, I would say it would be great if you plan on going out and shooting in the snow to have a weather-sealed camera. But of course, depending on your budget, that might not be feasible for you. Maybe you have an entry-level camera that's not weather sealed. So in that case, I also recommend, and this is regardless if you have a weather sealed camera or not, that you buy a rain cover for DSLR or mirrorless and lens. So right here on the right-hand side, there's a photo of what that looks like. And this will protect your camera and your equipment from the elements. Next, you might want to have some lens hood to protect the front of your lens against snowflakes, because once you're shooting, if a snowflakes hits the front of your lens, it can be very annoying because then you'll have watermarks also showing up in your photos that you might be able to Photoshop in post-process, but you might not. So if you're photographing portraits and the watermark is right on the person's face, then there's no getting around that. Another thing that you need is a polarizer to remove the glare from the snow and from the ice. So these are reflective surfaces. So if you're out shooting out in the middle of the day, the sun will be reflecting on the snow, it'll be reflecting on the ice. And so this will cut that glare out. And also it serves to protect your lens from moisture. So from forming that condensation or getting wet through the snow. So it also forms a protective barrier. Typically when I'm out shooting landscapes, my polarizer, I would say 99% of the time remains on the front of my lens. Another thing that you will need is a microfiber cleaning cloth. And the reason for that is because if you do get snow on your camera, you do not want to use your hands to wipe off your lens or your camera, because your hands are warm and they're probably going to melt the snow on your equipment, and this could seep inside your camera and cause problems long term if a lot of mildew starts forming inside your camera. So you're going to want to use something like a microfiber cleaning cloth, because this is absorbent and it will absorb the moisture from the camera. Moving on, another thing that you will need, and this is really good if you are going from a very cold temperature to warm temperature, so from outdoor to indoor, if there's a very dramatic change in temperature, a tip is to put your camera while you're still outside inside a Ziploc bag. And so while you're outside, you put your camera inside a Ziploc bag and you vacuum seal that. And then that way the condensation forms inside the bag and not inside your camera. So that's one tip. Another tip is, as soon as you get to your hotel or your home, is to grab your camera, remove the lens, take out your memory card and then put your camera in a box with a silica gel bag. Now, these are bags that, for example, when you buy new shoes, these are the little packs that come inside a shoe box. You can actually buy these packs at your local hardware store. They sell them at practically every hardware store. And that way you can go have some in your home, put your camera, put your lens inside a box with some silica gel packs, and then this will serve to completely absorb all the moisture from your camera that could be inside your camera. So all the condensation, all the moisture. I would say leave it for like 24 hours and that should take care of it. Also, if you ever happen to drop your camera in water, this will save your camera, and I can personally attest to this because it happened to me. My camera, I dropped it in a lake, like it got submerged underwater. I thought that was the end of my camera. And then some photographers recommended that I do this. I went to the hardware store within 24 hours. I put my camera inside a box, covered it in silica gel, and I mean, I took everything off. It was fully open. I put it face down and I left it there for a week, and my camera works with no problem. So this is like super absorbent for any kind of moisture that could be developing inside your camera or inside your lens, which is the biggest thing you need to be looking out for if you're going to be shooting out in winter conditions. Also, spare batteries. Pack spare batteries because the cold is the enemy of batteries, and this could kill your battery life. You might be out there and you might be used to shooting like 1,000 photos before your battery dies. You might be lucky if it's like -20 outside, if you maybe get 100 or 200 photos, so a fraction. So pack extra batteries, and then what you can do is have the batteries inside your coat pockets, have maybe some hand warmers to make sure that they stay warm, and that way you can replace the batteries while you're out shooting. Another thing that you'll need are ice cleats. If you're out shooting in lake, you might slip and fall, and the last thing you want to do is slip and fall when you have an expensive camera and lens around your neck, because you could break it. And then another thing that I recommend is to have photography gloves. So instead of buying regular mittens that you have to take on or off your hand, which will still freeze your hand and your fingers, they sell specialized gloves that you can just remove, like just the tip of your finger as shown in this photo right here. And that way just your fingers are exposed, the tip of your fingers are exposed for the moments that you need to take the shot. Now we are moving on to camera settings. In landscape in general, whether it's winter or whether it's fall or summer, these are my typical camera settings for landscape photography. So for aperture, I like to stay at f9, f11 for optimal sharpness. I don't like to go above that. I don't usually go to like f22, because what happens is if you're shooting at f22, your camera is going to pick up your photo is going to pick up the dust in your sensor, and then you might have these annoying little dust spots in your image. So f9, f11 will do the trick to get everything pretty sharp from front to back. Another thing is have your ISO at 100 to reduce noise. So this is like the grain that can form in your photo. If your ISO is too high, or you don't have like a camera that performs excellent in low light, you might have a grainy image. And then if, for example, a tourism board wants to buy your photo to put in a billboard and they're blowing it up, this might really show up and it would not look very good. For shutter speed, if I have aperture f9 and my ISO at 100 and my camera is telling me that my shutter speed, my ideal for the proper exposure, is at 1/10 of a second, I would recommend setting it up on a tripod and not relying on the steadiness of your hand, particularly if you're cold. So I would say the rule of thumb for me is if my shutter speed is at 1/20th of a second, I like to put it on a tripod just to make sure I don't have any camera shake for when I'm pushing down on my shutter, or maybe just if my hands are cold and I'm shivering. I also like to do long exposures, and I use ND filters for this if I'm doing daytime long exposures, because it does give you a different perspective. It will smooth out water, it will smooth out clouds, and it'll create movement in your images. As you can see on this photo here on the right, I did long exposure, so you have those soft, silky clouds. Now for ND filters, generally, I use a 6-stop ND filter for sunrise or for sunset. And then I use a 10-stop ND filter if it's during the day. And each one allows me to do a 1-minute long exposure. Now, going back to the aperture, as you can see, I have an example of the exact same image, but one was taken with an aperture of 3.5 versus an aperture of f9. Now, at a quick glance, these might look similar, but if you notice the tree at the very front, at f3.5, it's a little bit fuzzy, right? It's a little bit soft, it's not sharp, versus on the right-hand side. And I will show you an even closer look. So see, this is the difference between shooting at f3.5 and shooting at f9. Even the trees right behind this main tree right here, you can see the difference in the sharpness. Now let's dive into compositional tips. So one of my favorite things to look for when I'm out doing winter photography is looking for cracks. So when there's ice cracks, I love photographing because it provides texture, geometry, and I typically use a wide angle lens to enhance the size. What is a wide angle lens? On a crop, for me, I like a 10-20. On a full frame, 14-24. So what a wide angle lens will do is that anything that's in the immediate foreground, it will maximize the size. And then anything that's in the background, it will kind of minimize it. So it does give you a very unique perspective. So the trick with a wide angle lens is to get very close to the foreground to get that impact of that size and make sure that the background relates to the foreground. So see, for example, I used a wide angle lens as well for this photo on the left, and I found this amazing, beautiful ice crack. And it also has a leading line, which is another compositional tip in landscape photography. So it has this leading line, this crack that goes and just basically points your eye to that mountain. And then right here on the right, I also used my wide angle lens to photograph this icy shore right here. I just thought it was beautiful. It looked delicious, actually. It made me thirsty. And I used the wide angle lens to maximize the size. And as you can see, it looks really big in comparison to the mountain in the backdrop. Tip number 2 is to chase waterfalls. There are some waterfalls that never fully freeze in the winter, and they create magical conditions because the water becomes blue. Usually there's like icicles that form around the water. And I always do long exposures when I'm photographing water. So you don't need to do a very long exposure to obtain those silky waters. A 1 to 2 second long exposure is more than enough to create that movement in the water. You'll need a tripod. You'll need an ND filter. So depending on your lighting conditions, you might just need a 6-stop ND filter. And sometimes you can even get away with just using a polarizer if you're in a shaded area, because you only need to do a 1 second long exposure. Another tip when shooting long exposures is to do a 2-second timer to avoid a camera shake. So put your camera at a 2-second timer, hit the shutter, walk away, and 2 seconds later it'll take the shot. Or to use a shutter remote release, because that'll prevent any kind of camera shake from happening when you're pushing down on that shutter. So here's another silky waterfall photo that I took at the Natural Bridge in British Columbia. And here I'm going to play for you a quick video of this photo that I took. And you can just see how beautiful, you know, the water runs through the ice. You see all the icicles. It's just, it's one of my favorite times to shoot waterfalls. It's when it's transitioning into winter. Whoop. Tip number 3, and this is actually a tip that came directly from tourism boards and what they're looking for in landscape photography. And that tip is to add warm elements to a blue scene. So if you arrive at a scene and it's all white and blue and covered in snow, it is a really good idea to incorporate warm elements to have that contrast, to give you that feeling of cozy and warm and just like an escape from the cold blue winter. So in this case, I'm using a cabin, as well as here. If that cabin was not lit up at Lake Louise, it would just look like one big blue photo. But that pop of warmth, that pop of yellow there makes you want to escape the surrounding and go to that cozy cabin and maybe set yourself up by a fireplace and drink a hot cocoa. So that's the vibe that you feel. It's very warm and it's very inviting. And if you can't find a cabin, you can bring your own warmth. So you can buy these little lanterns, those little lights, and then have those little pops of yellow, those little pops of warmth in a photo. Tip number 4 is to use the starburst effect. And that is just something that I enjoy doing in general. So here I have, you can see the starburst effect on the left-hand side with the sun, and that happens when you're shooting at about f/16 and above. So when you're closing those blades, the light rays are coming through the blades, creating this starburst effect. So here's a photo with and without. So the photo on the left I shot at f8 versus the photo on the right, which I shot at f18. And in my opinion, it just makes the photo look extra special. It gives you something to look at, something interesting and unique that will separate your photo from the rest. Another thing to note is you might see some starburst in some photos with some other photographers and then wonder why your starburst does not look the same. Maybe it doesn't have a lot of rays and you're not happy with it. And here's the thing. Whether you go from f/16 to f/20 is not going to make a difference. What makes a difference in a starburst is the number of blades in your particular lens. So different lenses have different number of blades. So each lens will give you a completely different type of starburst effect. So if you have 8 blades, like an even number of blades inside your lens, you will get 8 rays. But if you have an odd number of blades in your lens, so like 9 blades, it'll actually give you double that amount. And it's just the mechanics of how the lens is built. So if you're not happy with your current starburst, switch up your lenses and see the different types of starburst that you get with your other lenses. Tip number 5 is to use subjects with a pop of color. So if you have a big white scene, for example, that I'm showing you here in this picture, I really love having a pop of color. So have somebody wear different colors like red, blue, green, etc. to have them stand out. So here are some examples. So I would stay away from black, brown, or white, because what happens is you might blend into the scene and then you're not standing out. So for example, in these 2 photos, if either model was wearing white or black, it wouldn't have the same effect. Tip number 6 is to use snow-covered trees for framing. You know, it just gives you that extra layer of snow, of cold. Here's a video that I took at Pito Lake in Alberta. And then I used some layers of that tree there for framing for that photo, which you see on the right-hand side. Same thing here, I used at Lake Louise. This is the behind the scenes of the photo that you see on the right-hand side. I used some of the branches and some of the snow there to frame that cozy little cabin. Or if the tree looks really good and it has the perfect amount of snow and you can use it in your scene, you can just use the whole tree as a foreground. This is probably my most popular photo that I've ever taken, and it all has to do with that tree. Tip number 7, no tree, no problem. You can always use the snow as a foreground. So right here, this photo, instead of just getting super close up and standing by that snow and taking an eye level shot, I actually got low to the ground and then I used that snow as a foreground to frame my entire scene. Same thing on the left. Here I used some of that snow on the foreground. It almost feels like you can reach in and touch that snow. So it creates depth in your photo when you're using some kind of foreground. And it can sometimes be just as simple as some snow. And then on the right hand side, I actually used my footsteps on the snow to create a leading line towards me. So I used the snow to my advantage. I walked and then I just positioned myself. So that way I created a leading line in the snow. And if maybe you have some water and not just snow, sometimes if the conditions are right, you can get frost flowers. And frost flowers are really, really beautiful. And they're usually around a body of water, around the ice. So you can go hunting for those as well. Tip number 8 is to chase some morning fog. So find a body of water that has not yet frozen and then go for sunrise. What happens is the water is warmer than the air above it, and then it creates this vapor. I think that's how you pronounce it. And then when the light is hitting it, it just creates this beautiful mist. So here on the left-hand side, you can just see that mist of the snow, of the sun hitting right there. And then also on the right-hand side, if you look at where the mountains are, you can see that little fog. You can see that mist forming above the water, and it can create very magical conditions. Final advice, but hang on because I do have a very cool video I want to show you, is to be prepared, okay? Wear snow pants, bring your mittens, bring your gloves, your ice cleats. Make sure that you're warm, because if you are out in the cold and it is -20 and you are freezing, you're not going to take your time. You're going to want to rush through the process, and photography needs you need a lot of patience. Timing is everything. So make sure that first and foremost, you are warm, that you're feeling good, and that you have everything that you need. So prepare the night before, because when you're out doing winter photography, you need a lot more things than when you're out shooting in the summer. Another tip is to plan your photo shoot. So there's several apps that you can use to guarantee that you have some really good conditions. So for example, my Sunset app actually gives you a rating if it's going to be a good sunrise or a bad sunrise. Windy.com tells you if it's going to be really windy or if it's going to be mild. And Astrospheric also tells you what the cloud coverage is going to be like and what the visibility in the area is going to be like. Because if you're going to be motivating yourself to go out shooting in really cold weather conditions, you want to make sure that at least the conditions are going to be nice. Be consistent. If you want to grow an account, if you want to be a renowned landscape photographer, if you want to improve your craft, you have to be consistent and you have to be disciplined, meaning you have to go out even when you don't want to, because it is the only way that you will improve and you will get better. And also be safe. Research the road conditions after a snowfall. Sometimes they're closed, sometimes they're icy, and safety is first and foremost. I would never put myself in jeopardy if the conditions are slippery or if there's a snowstorm to go get a picture. It is just not worth it. So you have to make sure you check the road conditions, that there's no accidents. Make sure that you check for weather for snowstorms. If you're going to go out hiking or exploring in an area, check for avalanche warnings. And then finally, this is very important. If you're out walking on ice, make sure that it is thick enough, because if it cracks and you go under, that is it. I actually one time fell through the ice and I thought it was safe. I had been to that place many times before, but fortunately it was not that deep and I managed to climb out, but I was fortunate. And that concludes this presentation. Thank you so very much for watching. I hope that you found this information very valuable and very useful. And stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you on the next one.